Imagine a plant that could not only be used for food, but could also be transformed into versatile, multifunctional tools. Today, me and Tuck are going to share with you the most diverse crop we've ever grown in the garden. Back in spring, I grabbed my seeds to plant, filled a jumbo Vego seed cell with my starting mix, buried my seed, watered it in, and covered it up. After about 10 days, my seeds sprouted. You can see how nice and healthy they look, and the first true leaves are starting to grow. This was one of the many gourds and squash that I grew this year. I wanted to grow this particular gourd in a container. I chose to use a food-safe 5-gallon bucket that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's. Some drainage holes needed to be added to the bottom of the bucket, so I used a 1/2-inch drill bit and drilled 5 holes at the bottom. I made sure to grab the small pieces of plastic and threw them away. Now, there won't be any stagnant water sitting at the bottom of my bucket. Next, I made some of my own homemade soil. I use cocoa coir, mushroom compost, perlite, and vermiculite, and mix them all together on a tarp. After it's finished being thoroughly mixed, you can see how nice this stuff comes out and how beautiful the texture and the structure of it is. Then, I filled my bucket with my homemade soil. Before planting, I made sure to add some all-purpose fertilizer. This is important because gourds are heavy feeders and do best in a nutrient-rich soil. I just spread some fertilizer over the top of the soil, then mixed it in the top few inches. You can see the young plants grew a bit over the last 3 days. It's a perfect time to transplant them. You can see the roots peeking out of the bottom as I pop them out of the Vego seed cell. Now, I'm just adding some mycorrhizal inoculant onto the roots. This will ensure the plants develop the mycorrhizal association. Then, I just drop the plant into the soil, pat it down a bit to fill any big air gaps, and water the young plant in. 6 days later, the plant was looking great and was adjusted to its new home. You can see some nice growth on it. That day, I decided to spray my plant with surround kaolin clay to protect the plant from squash bugs, cucumber beetles, and vine borers. This clay acts as a protectant. It's just super fine clay. It forms a protective layer over the plant. It doesn't inhibit growth, and I spray this on all of my young cucumbers, gourds, and squash. Here is what it looks like on the plant after it has dried. Insects won't want to munch on this plant. 20 days later, the plant showed a lot of healthy growth, and it looked like it was ready to start attaching this plant to a trellis. I noticed there was a bunch of different heads to the vine. I didn't want the vine growing off in all different directions, so I decided to prune back a number of the suckers, and also some of the leaves at the base of the plant. It looks a lot cleaner like this. For a trellis, I decided to build one with some old pieces of a cedar tree I took down a couple years ago. I dropped my posts in, made sure they were level, and cut them down to the right height. Then I used a piece of a ripped down 2x4 for the top piece of my trellis, screwed it in, and added some braces for stability. I chose to use tomato roller hooks for the top of my trellis because I wanted to plant some tomatoes and cucumbers in containers to grow on this trellis as well. With the roller hooks, I can release more string. This allows me to lower and lean my plants. After getting my tomatoes in, I grabbed my gourd and began attaching the vine to the string using tomato clips. I love these little clips. They make it easy to attach and they put less stress on the vine. Here is the trellis with the tomato plants and the gourd growing. It looks great. They will really be soaking up the sun on this trellis. About 70 days after planting, the Luffa plant started to really open up its flowers. Look how beautiful the flowers are on this trellis. The bees were flying all around working on them. The male flowers will often form in these clusters like you see here. The female flowers will have the little fruit at the base of them. If you want to, you could go out and hand pollinate your female flowers by getting some pollen from the male flower and bringing it over to the female. But I didn't find that to be necessary because there were so many bees working around them and just doing their thing. A month later, the first large fruit formed. Over that time, I added some wood chip mulch to the container to keep the soil cool. You can see how perfect this fruit is forming. Good size to it, and it's growing right next to some tomatoes. The trellis was looking really nice with all the tomatoes and the gourd hanging from it. 2 weeks later, the gourd was starting to turn yellow. It wasn't yet the perfect time to harvest, so I wanted to give it a little bit more time. 12 days later, the gourd was starting to turn brown. You could harvest it at this point, but I like to wait for them to completely mature and the skin to be brittle before I harvest. At this point, you probably know what this gourd is and what it's typically used for, but I have some really cool ideas you probably have never seen before and ways to use this gourd that I think you will love. The loofah is ready to grab. This thing is super light now. It has like no weight to it at all. Here is the fully dried gourd. When you shake it, you should be able to hear the seeds rattling around on the inside. A unique thing about this gourd is it has a kind of secret hatch to get the seeds out. On the bottom of the gourd, you will notice this ring right here. This here is the top, and this here is the bottom. You just pull at the natural ring and the bottom will come off just like a cap would. Look how awesome that is. This allows the loofah to reseed themselves. If we left it on the vine long enough, that ring would come off and the seeds would eventually start falling to the ground and spread. Now that we have the cap removed, we can just shake the loofah and the seeds will fall into our bowl. It works well if you knock the side of the loofah against the bowl. It helps free the seeds up so you can collect them. We got a lot of seeds from one gourd. Look how perfect and ripe the seeds are. That's a good sign that our gourd was fully mature when we harvested it. If you want, you could just peel the skin off the gourd, but what I chose to do is soak the gourd overnight in a 5-gallon bucket. This will soften the skin and allow it to peel off easier. I filled the gourd with some water so it wouldn't be as buoyant and wouldn't float. Then I just dropped it in the bucket so it could soak. The next day, I came out and grabbed my gourd and emptied the water from it back into the bucket. Now I can easily run my thumb along the length of the gourd to separate the skin from the inside. I can peel the skin back and the loofah pops out easily. Look at that, perfect. This is what I love to see. If you want to disinfect your loofah, you can make a mixture with white vinegar and water at a ratio of 1:1 and let it soak for about 15 to 30 minutes. I decided to do something a little different to disinfect my loofah and also to lighten up the color of it. If you want, you could just leave it with that natural look, but I wanted to do something to, lighten up the color a little bit while also disinfecting it. I added to my bucket 10 cups of water and then 1 cup of bleach for a 10:1 ratio of water to bleach. Then I dropped my loofah in, mixed it around a bit with some tongs and let it sit for about 15 minutes. After about 10 minutes, the loofah went from a light brown to a whiter color. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I just wanted to see how much it would change the color of the loofah. Then I took my loofah and laid it on a rack in the sun to allow it to fully dry out. The most common use for the loofah is a sponge. This variety is called the dishcloth loofah, but me and Tuck had an idea to try something you may have never seen before. We still will use some of it for a sponge, but what we wanted to do is try to use this to make some seed starting containers or seed starting pots out of this loofah. First, I grabbed the dried loofah and used the scissor to cut a piece a few inches in length. Then I cut some of the inside membrane with my scissor to make some space for soil and tore it out. I made sure to still leave some at the bottom though to help hold my soil in. Next, I added some of my seed starting mix to my new homegrown natural container, tapped it down a bit to make sure there weren't big air gaps, added a little more soil, and lightly compressed it. I grabbed some ice bred arugula. These have tiny little seeds you can see here. Made an indent with my finger in the soil, dropped in my seed, covered it up, and then watered it in. Check out the homegrown seed starting container. It looks awesome and it's super unique. Several days later, the seed sprouted and the plant was looking super healthy in the natural pot. The loofah container looks so fascinating. It almost looks like roots on the outside. The great thing about using this as a seed starting pot is that it's natural and it's porous. When transplanting into the garden, you could just bury the whole thing. You don't have to pop the seedling out of the container. You can just dig your hole, drop in your young plant with the loofah pot, cover it with some soil, press it down a bit, make sure the height is right, and then you could just water it in. The roots of your plant won't have any problem pushing through the loofah pot, and over time, the loofah will break down in the soil. This is a quick, easy, convenient way to transplant, and your plant will go through little to no transplant shock. Another thing we could use this loofah for is just the obvious one of using it as a sponge. You can use it to wash dishes, scrub veggies, clean surfaces, or just use it in the shower as a sponge. And then when you're done with it, you can just toss the whole thing into the compost pile. This guy is getting sick of me talking about the loofah and not seeing how it could actually work out for him. So let's test this thing out for Tuck. We'll cut a piece of this loofah right here, just with a scissor, just like this. And then we'll grab Tuck a carrot and scrub the carrot a little bit, clean it off with this loofah. Let's come back here. I'm sure there's some carrots ready. This one is a little bit small, but still looks pretty dang good. It's looking a little dirty though. Let's clean it up for the little boss. Just gonna grab a hose. Doesn't look like it needs to be scrubbed much, but this is one of the good uses. It's just natural fiber to be able to just scrub this thing clean so it doesn't get any dirt on it. This guy's used to eating them a little dirty. Now that we grew him a little sponge, this guy can have a nice fresh carrot. Look at that, nice and clean. What do you think, boyo? Yeah, this guy's ready to get at it. Now I think he's starting to come around to the loofahs. I think he's a fan of the loofahs now. So, cool thing about the loofah, additional to some of the stuff I showed you, is that they're actually edible. You really want to make sure you eat them when they're young. About 4 to 6 inches in length is ideal when the skin is still like green and smooth. You don't want to eat them when they get older, or they're gonna get like, they're gonna have this in the inside of them. It's gonna not be good to eat because this will start growing, this like inner membrane of the loofah. They have a relatively good flavor when they're young, and they absorb flavor as well. It's like the flavor is slightly mild and sweet, similar to like a cucumber or a squash. But like I mentioned, they're good at absorbing other flavors. That's why they're ideal for like stir fries and stews and soups. I personally don't prefer to eat them. I think they're better as like for function, for tools, not as much for consumption. Overall, I would choose to eat other squash that I grow. Some of my favorite varieties being like the Costata Romanesco zucchini. That one just tastes amazing, a nutty flavor. It's my favorite zucchini of all time. Or I prefer to eat something like the Gelber English or custard squash. That's my favorite patty pan squash. And those ones I would prefer to eat rather than the loofah. If you want to use it for scrubbing, you could cut it and sort of unravel it. Break the membrane up like this. This will be like a more abrasive side for scrubbing. If you want to scrub stuff like this. This is like a smoother side on the outside. So the inside is going to be a little bit more abrasive and better for scrubbing some of that stuff, like maybe some of your dishes or whatever you want to use it for, or maybe to scratch that back a little bit. There are a number of additional uses for the loofah. Just be creative with it. For instance, you could cut pieces of the loofah, soak them in essential oils, put them in bowls, and they'll act as like natural air fresheners throughout your house. The porous nature of the loofah sponge allows it to diffuse the scent really well. Another thing you could do with these loofahs is you could use them in like exfoliating soaps. So you can cut a piece of it, pour the mixture for the soap into it, and then it'll act, you can make a soap, but it also is like a scrubber on the inside. So that's pretty cool. That's a classic one I've seen a lot of people do with the loofahs. Another thing is you could use them in like art projects. Overall, you should just try to be as creative as you can with this sponge. There are so many different uses for it, the loofah itself. So, I mean, there's so many different things you could do. If there are some additional ways that you use loofah sponges around your garden or around the house, just let me know down in the comments. I think it's just an incredibly diverse plant and a diverse crop because we can eat it too. And it's just such a fun thing to grow. This was my first year growing it because I kind of hesitated to grow it. I didn't see a real need to grow it, but after growing them, it's going to be something that's always a staple in my garden because not only was it fun to grow, it was easy to grow, but it's just a great overall tool to have in the garden and also at the house. That's today's video, growers. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you got something out of it. Me and Tuck hope that we encourage you to plant some loofah in your backyard. And we hope we encourage you to try some different stuff. Even later coming this year, we're gonna have some other cool crops that we've never grown before that we're using for things other than just eating. I think everything we're gonna grow you can eat, but it's just fun to try things that are new, try things that are different, and it gets you excited to go out into the garden more. And the more time you spend in the garden, the better your garden will do overall. That's just kind of the way it goes. Me and Tuck also wanted to thank everyone who's a part of Team Grow. Thanks for being a part of everything we're doing. Thanks for having your hand in so much of what we're doing. And the whole idea for Team Grow is to encourage people to grow food, and then they grow their own food and encourage other people to grow food. So the whole team, and it just grows exponentially because all of you are sharing. So you're as important to the team as me and Tuck are, because the idea is just to get everyone with gardens in their own backyard. That's the vision of the future. So people can be eating their fresh, homegrown veggies or even growing their own sponges in their backyard garden. Me and Tuck also wanted to send a thank you to one of our new channel members, Carmen Hudson. Thanks for being a part of Team Grow. Thanks for having your hand in everything we're doing out here. We had a blast making this video. Let us know down in the comments if you enjoy these kinds of videos where it's not solely focused just on the edible aspect of a plant, but it's just about getting the most out of nature, doing some stuff with nature, natural products, and just, it's fun to use this stuff because it's safe and it's unique, and it's, I mean, overall, I just had such a fun time doing it. Tuck did too. We had a blast out here. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you share this video with your friends and everyone else if you want to get this message out of growing your own food and maybe even growing your own sponges at home. We're trying to create a better future for everyone out there. Tuck and James will be back again real soon. We out.